The morning we left for the Pacific Coast Highway trip, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. I'd planned everything down to the last detail, 6 days, 5 nights, starting in San Francisco and winding our way down to San Diego. Boutique hotels booked, restaurants with reservations, a convertible rental with the top already unlocked and ready. Melissa had been stressed for weeks, grinding through a brutal quarter at her marketing firm, and I wanted to give her something to exhale into. That's what you do when you love someone. You pay attention, and then you act on what you see. Melissa and I had been together for 3 years. 3 years of Sunday morning pancakes and inside jokes and meeting each other's families and building a life that felt, at least to me, like it was quietly becoming something permanent. I had a ring in mind. Not yet purchased, but in mind. I'd been walking past jewelry stores for months, doing that thing where you pause and look and then tell yourself the timing isn't quite right. The trip was supposed to be the moment I got clarity. 6 days on the coast, no deadlines, no distractions, just the two of us and the Pacific Ocean. I figured somewhere around Big Sur, maybe with the waves crashing below and the sun dropping into the water, I'd know for certain. I'd known Melissa for 4 years total, 1 year as friends before we started dating. She was sharp and funny and had this way of reading a room that I always admired. She could walk into a party and within 20 minutes know exactly who was worth talking to and who was performing. She had opinions and defended them and changed her mind when the evidence was overwhelming, which I respected. She was not a pushover and she was not a liar. That's what I believed. That's what I had built my entire understanding of her on. We loaded the rental car at 7 in the morning. She'd packed 2 bags to my one, which I teased her about while loading the trunk, and she'd laughed and told me that men had no concept of options. I kissed her at the driver's side door before she got in. It felt like the beginning of something good. The drive from our apartment in Sacramento down to San Francisco to pick up the coastal route took about 2 hours, and they were easy, comfortable hours. We had a road trip playlist she'd spent an entire evening curating. She sang along to things with her sunglasses on and her feet propped on the dashboard, and I kept glancing over at her thinking, yeah, this is it. This is the person. Whatever doubt I'd been carrying dissolved somewhere on the I-80 with the windows down. We spent the first night in San Francisco, had dinner at a place in the Mission District that her friend had recommended, walked across a piece of the Golden Gate footpath in the early evening cold, and fell asleep in a hotel room with white linens and a view of the bay. Everything was perfect in the way that makes you nervous because you're aware of how rare perfect actually is. Day 2 we started driving south. Highway 1 through Marin and into the wine country edge of the coast. Melissa was in charge of navigation and snack distribution, which she took seriously. She had a little cooler on the back seat with fruit and cheese and those fancy crackers she liked. We stopped at a state beach and walked barefoot in the sand for an hour and ate lunch at a seafood shack where the clam chowder was served in a bread bowl the size of my head. She took about 40 pictures. I took a few of her. It was good. Everything was so genuinely good. It was somewhere around the beginning of day 3, south of Monterey and heading toward the Big Sur stretch, that things started to feel slightly off. Not dramatically, nothing I could point to and name. Just a shift in the air, the way pressure changes before a storm you can't see yet. She'd gotten quiet during the last 20 miles. I assumed she was tired or lost in thought or enjoying the scenery in the private way she sometimes did. I put it down to nothing and kept driving. Then her phone buzzed and she looked at it and something moved across her face. It was fast, barely there, but I caught it because I knew her face. A micro-expression I couldn't quite decode, not alarm exactly, but something adjacent to it. Awareness. Consciousness of something. She tilted the screen slightly away from me, which she'd never done before, and typed something back quickly and then put the phone face down on her leg. I didn't say anything. I noted it the way you note something small and file it away and tell yourself you're being paranoid. We stopped in Big Sur for lunch and the scenery was extraordinary, the kind that makes language feel inadequate, the cliffs dropping 1,000 feet into churning blue-green water, the road carved impossibly into the mountainside. I suggested we stop at McWay Falls for the overlook, and she agreed but seemed distracted, kept checking her phone when she thought I wasn't watching. At one point I went to take her hand and she gave it to me but her grip was loose, her attention elsewhere. "You okay?" I asked at the overlook. "Yeah, just tired," she said. "Headache coming on. We can stop somewhere soon if you need to." "No, keep going. I'm fine." She smiled at me. It was a smile I recognized from a different context, the one she used when she needed to manage someone's concern. I'd seen her use it on her mother. I'd never seen her use it on me. The phone buzzed again on the walk back to the car. She answered it this time, dropping back a few steps. I heard her say, in a voice she thought was low enough, "Yeah, I know." I said I'll figure it out. I waited at the car and said nothing. We got back in and drove, and she gave me directions to a town called Cambria for the night. Perfectly normal. Dinner at a wine bar, conversation that felt slightly strained but passable, sleep. I lay awake for a while listening to her breathing and telling myself I was inventing a problem out of fragments that meant nothing. Day 4 is when everything broke open. She told me over breakfast that she'd been thinking. There was a cute little town she'd read about called San Luis Obispo that had some amazing shops and galleries she wanted to check out. Could we detour off our planned route and spend a few hours there before continuing to Santa Barbara? I had no reason to object. It was a road trip. Detours were part of it. I said sure, and we packed up and drove the 30 minutes inland. What happened next I did not see coming, and that's the part that still staggers me when I think about it, not just the betrayal itself but the sheer ordinary confidence of it, the way she executed the lie with such practiced ease. We parked downtown and she said she wanted to check out a shop she'd seen on Instagram. Could I go get us coffee from the place across the street while she browsed? It seemed reasonable. I walked across and got in line and happened to look back through the window while I was waiting, and I watched her walk 2 blocks north and then turn a corner. Something in my stomach moved. I got the coffees and waited. 10 minutes. 15. I texted her, "Where are you? Coffee's getting cold." 3 dots. Then, "Sorry, this shop is bigger than it looked. Give me 5 more minutes." 20 minutes total. Then she came back around the corner and down the street looking slightly flushed and adjusted her sunglasses and walked toward me with a smile. "Sorry that took forever. Nothing I really wanted." She took her coffee. "Ready to go." "What shop was it?" I asked. "Just some little boutique, I don't even remember the name. Nothing special." We drove. I was quiet. She talked about the scenery. I answered in the right places. Here is what I did at the next gas stop while she went inside to use the restroom. I opened the shared location app we'd both installed about a year ago after she had a minor car incident and we'd agreed it was smart to have. We rarely checked it, but it logged history. I pulled up her location trail from the morning. She hadn't gone to a boutique. She had walked to an apartment complex on Broad Street and spent 22 minutes there before walking back. I sat with the screen in my hands and stared at it long enough that the display dimmed. The address was specific, a building with a name and a number. I screenshot it. I did not react when she came back out with a bottle of water and a bag of peanut M&Ms she dropped in my lap. "Found your favorite," she said. "Thanks," I said. I drove. I thought about what I had in my hands. I thought about the micro-expressions and the angled phone screen and the quiet stretches and the managed smile. I thought about how cleanly I'd been handled. And underneath all of that thinking was something cold and heavy settling into my chest like concrete poured slowly, something that had not yet found its shape but was already permanent. We reached Santa Barbara in the late afternoon and checked into the hotel. While she was in the shower, I did what anyone with a smartphone and a brain could do in 4 minutes. I searched the address. I found a name attached to it quickly enough through a combination of searches, a Facebook profile, a LinkedIn page, an old Instagram that hadn't been updated in years. His name was Derek Calloway. 29 years old. Santa Barbara area. And in the oldest, least scrubbed corners of Melissa's own social media, buried in posts from 5 and 6 years ago, there he was. They'd dated before me. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and read what I could find. It wasn't much, she'd clearly done some cleanup at some point, but it was enough. Posts about road trips. A birthday message from her to him that used the word always. A comment from a mutual friend asking, "You two still together?" that had never been answered. Whatever they'd been, it had been real, and it had existed, and she had driven off our road trip, off the trip I had planned and paid for and given to her as a gift, to see him without telling me, while pretending to browse a boutique. She came out of the bathroom in the hotel robe and sat down next to me on the bed. She smelled like the hotel shampoo. She looked happy, unburdened, relaxed. The shower had refreshed her. I looked at her for a moment. I could feel my jaw set. "Melissa," I said. "Who did you visit in San Luis Obispo?" The shift was immediate. Not guilt exactly, more like the shift a person makes when they realize the floor they've been standing on is glass. She blinked. "What are you talking about?" "The boutique. That you went to. That you can't remember the name of. That you walked 2 blocks north and around the corner to get to, on Broad Street, at an apartment complex." Her mouth opened and nothing came out immediately. "I have the location history," I said. "I have a screenshot. I googled the address. I found Derek Calloway. I found your old posts. I kept my voice flat because I needed to be coherent. I needed to hear what she was going to say. Tell me what's going on. She said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, it's not what you think. Tell me what it is, then. Specifically. He texted me a few days ago, she said. He's been going through something. He needed to talk. I've known him for years, Stephen, he's been part of my life, and he reached out and I didn't want to make it into a whole thing, by hiding it. By not making it dramatic when there's nothing dramatic about it. You actively lied to me. You pretended to browse a shop. You walked there while I was getting coffee. You hid it in real time, Melissa. That's not avoiding drama, that's deception. She shifted. Her hands came together in her lap. We just talked. That's all that happened. Prove it. I don't have to prove anything, you're right, I said. You don't. And I don't have to keep sitting in this room. I stood up. Stephen, how long has he been texting you? Silence. How long? Since before the trip. Something detonated quietly inside my chest. So he was texting you on the drive down. You were texting him when I was driving. He was on the other end of every time you tilted your phone away from me. She didn't deny it. Was this the plan? Drive down the coast and fit in a visit. Did you route us through San Luis Obispo on purpose? I didn't, he mentioned where he lived and the timing just. She stopped. The timing just worked out, I said. Right. Stephen, nothing happened, something happened, I said, and my voice finally cracked through the flat control I'd been maintaining, not into yelling but into something harder and colder. You chose him over my trust. You took a trip I built for us and used it to go see your ex behind my back. You lied to my face with a smile while you were holding coffee you'd accepted from me as a cover story. Something happened, Melissa. The only question is how much. She was crying now. I knew you'd make it into something bigger than it was, that's why you hid it. Not because I'd overreact. Because you knew it was wrong. I picked up my phone. I want to see your messages with him. That's a violation of, hand me your phone or tell me the truth. One of the two. She handed me the phone. I read for 5 minutes while she sat and didn't speak. The messages went back 3 weeks. They had started professionally enough, he'd had some kind of career setback, she'd expressed sympathy, it was plausible as casual reconnection. But the tone shifted over a week, became warmer, became something with a current underneath it. By the week before our trip he was writing things like I've missed the way you see things and I keep thinking about what you said, you were always the clearest person I knew, and she was writing back things like I think about that too and this has been really good, catching up like this. She had not mentioned me once in 22 days of messages. I did not exist in any of it. The visit that day had been 30 minutes longer than she'd told me, according to the messages. He'd said afterward, thank you for coming. This meant more than you know. She'd responded, I'm glad I did. Take care of yourself. The last message was from 20 minutes before she walked back to meet me. I put the phone down on the bed. Nothing happened, she said again, quietly. You told him you'd been thinking about what he said. You told him catching up like this had been really good. You went to his apartment on a trip you were supposed to be on with me and kept it a secret. And now you want me to categorize that as nothing. I picked up my wallet and my room key. I'm going to get some air. Stephen, please don't do this. Do what? React. Notice. I stopped at the door. I want to be very clear with you. I am not a backup plan and I am not someone who can be managed. I need some time to think. I went downstairs and sat in the hotel lobby for a long time and looked at my phone and thought about the ring I'd been mentally shopping for in the drive down Highway 1 and the way her grip had been loose when I took her hand at McWay Falls. I thought about all the ways I'd told myself I was imagining things. I thought about Derek Calloway and the word always in a birthday post she'd never deleted and the fact that he'd missed the way she saw things, which is a very specific thing to miss about someone. I made 3 decisions sitting in that lobby. The first was that I was not going to cry. Not there, not then. There would be time for that later and in private. The second was that I was not going to continue this trip. The third was that I was not going to drive home with Melissa. I opened my laptop at the hotel business center and booked a one-way rental car from Santa Barbara back to Sacramento. I paid for the extra fee and did not feel it. I texted my closest friend, a guy named Ryan I'd known since college, and told him what had happened and what I was about to do. Ryan texted back in under a minute, do exactly that. You need anything, call me. I then sent an email to the hotel we were booked at in San Diego and canceled the remaining nights. I did this methodically, in order, the way you do things when you cannot afford to feel them yet. Then I went back upstairs. Melissa was sitting on the bed with her knees pulled up and her eyes red. She looked up when I came in. I booked a rental car, I said. I'm driving home tonight. She stared. You're, what? I'm not finishing this trip. And I'm not riding home with you. Stephen, you're overreacting. I am reacting, I said, and I started putting my things into my bag. There's a difference. An overreaction would be proportionate to something small. This is not small. I folded my shirts and placed them in and zipped the side pocket. I was very deliberate about it. The car we rented is in your name because your credit card had the better insurance rate. It's yours to drive back or keep until the return date. I don't care. So you're just leaving me here? You're in a hotel in Santa Barbara, Melissa. You have a car. You have money. You have a phone with Derek Calloway's number already in it. I picked up my bag. You're not being abandoned. You made a choice that told me exactly where I fit into your life right now, and I'm acting accordingly. This is insane, she said. We can talk about this, we talked. I read the messages. There's nothing left to clarify. I put on my jacket. When I get home I'd like you to come get your things within the week. I'll give you a day in time, we'll make it clean. You're breaking up with me. Yes. She covered her face with her hands and her shoulders shook. Part of me, a significant part, wanted to cross the room. That is what 3 years does to you, it wires you toward someone even when they've hurt you, even when you know better. I stood with my bag and waited for the part of me that knew better to win, and eventually it did. Take care of yourself, I said. And I left. The drive back north was 4 hours and I did it alone in a rental car at night with the windows down partway and music that I cannot remember now playing from a playlist I didn't choose. Somewhere around Paso Robles I finally let myself feel it, this eruption that started in my chest and spread outward, and I had to pull off at a gas station and sit in the parking lot for a while. I called Ryan. She went to his apartment, I said. I know, he said. You told me. She had 22 days of messages and I don't exist in any of them. I know. I was going to look at rings, I said. Ryan was quiet for a second. I'm sorry, man. I genuinely am. We talked until I was steady enough to drive again. He was at his house in Sacramento when I got back at 2 in the morning and had left the spare key under the mat like he'd offered, because he knew I couldn't go back to my own apartment yet, not until she'd been there, and I wasn't ready to watch her clear out 3 years of shared space in real time. I slept on his couch for 3 nights. The grief was not cinematic. It was grinding and repetitive, the same images cycling on loop, her face at McWay Falls, the angled phone screen, the moment she said it's not what you think because she'd already run the calculation and decided what I should be allowed to think. The worst part wasn't the possibility that something physical had happened, though that tortured me too. The worst part was the premeditation. She'd woven this parallel thread through our trip before it even started. She'd looked at me planning something I built with care and love and thought about how to fit Derek Calloway into the margins of it. Ryan let me process without rushing me. He fed me takeout and let me talk in circles and occasionally said useful things, and on day 3 he said something that shifted something, you already did the right thing. The rest is just recovering from someone else's bad decision. On day 4 I went back to my apartment. She'd come and gone with most of her things. The closet had obvious gaps. The bathroom counter was cleared of her half. She'd left a note on the kitchen table that said she was sorry and that she hadn't meant for things to go the way they had and that she hoped we could talk when I was ready. I put the note in the recycling bin without responding. I then did what you do when the only environment you've been sitting in is grief. I went to see a therapist. I don't have complicated feelings about therapy. I've been before, briefly, after my father passed. It's a tool, and I needed it. The therapist I found was named Dr. Patricia Nolan, mid-50s, no nonsense, the kind of person who heard your story without filling in the emotional response she thought you should be having. At our first session I described everything factually and she listened and then said, "What are you most angry about?" And I said, "The management. The way she managed me." And Dr. Nolan said, "Say more." And I did. That session was the first time I understood that what had broken wasn't just the betrayal, it was the discovery that someone I'd trusted completely had developed a private system for handling me, a set of techniques for keeping me adjacent to the truth without quite letting me reach it. That's what the tilted phone was. That's what the San Luis Obispo detour was. I hadn't been her partner in that version, I'd been a variable to be controlled. Dr. Nolan helped me understand the difference between processing something and feeding it. I had a tendency toward the latter, playing the messages back in my head, rereading the screenshot of the location history, constructing increasingly detailed timelines of what had happened when. That wasn't grief, she said. That was trying to find a detail that would make it make sense, and it wouldn't, because the reason it had happened wasn't in the details. It wasn't a choice she'd made about what I deserved. That distinction turned out to be the hinge everything else swung on. I'm a structural engineer. I solve problems with load paths and force distribution and material stress thresholds. I understand systems, how weight moves through structures, where things fail, why. Sitting in Dr. Nolan's office in those first few weeks, I started to understand myself the same way. Where I'd put too much structural weight. Where I'd been loading trust onto joints that hadn't been tested. Not blaming myself, the structure of our relationship was her failure too, and primarily hers, but understanding my own architecture better. I went back to the gym. I hadn't been consistently since the previous fall, when work had exploded, and the physical return was both harder and better than I remembered. I got up at 5:30 3 days a week and went before work. I heard in the specific satisfying way that comes from doing something your body had been missing. Within 6 weeks I noticed it in the mirror and, more importantly, I noticed it in my energy, the way I moved through the day differently, with something back in me that had been low. Work helped. I was in the middle of a bridge retrofit project, a complicated seismic upgrade on an overpass south of Sacramento, and I put myself into it with a focus that bordered on obsessive. My project manager told me in a quarterly review that my output had been exceptional. I said thank you and meant it. The work was a container for my attention that kept me from emptying my attention into worse places. Ryan introduced me to his cycling group, a loose collection of 8 or 9 people who rode trails on Sunday mornings. I was not a cyclist. I bought a used bike from a guy on Craigslist and showed up embarrassingly unprepared on the first Sunday, barely kept up, got home and could not sit down for the rest of the day. I went back the next Sunday. And the one after that. By the second month I wasn't trailing the group anymore. By the fourth month I was one of the people setting the pace. Somewhere in those months I also called my older sister Claire, who lived in Denver and who had met Melissa twice and liked her, and I told her the whole story. Claire listened and then was quiet and then said, I'm going to tell you something and you're going to hate it and then in 6 months you're going to call me and say I was right. Okay, I said. You're going to be so much better for this. I did, in fact, hate it. She was right, though. In the course of those first 2 months, I had also, with Ryan's help, done some research. Not obsessive research, not the loop-feeding Dr. Nolan had warned me about, but purposeful. I wanted to know what the truth had actually been. Not for revenge. Not yet. Because I had lived with a partial picture for 3 years and I was tired of partial pictures. Ryan had a mutual friend with someone who had gone to college with Melissa, a woman named Janet who'd known her peripherally and still followed her on Instagram. Through Janet, through the kind of social media archaeology that the modern age makes embarrassingly easy, we pieced together that Derek Calloway and Melissa had been involved on and off for 2 years before I met her, that their last documented contact prior to this had been a tag post at a mutual friend's wedding 2 years into our relationship, and that she'd never mentioned him. Not once. In 3 years of relationship conversation that covered a lot of ground, he had never come up. I also found, through LinkedIn, that Derek Calloway had recently been laid off. The career setback she'd mentioned to me, confirmed by his LinkedIn showing a sudden gap in employment, had happened roughly 4 weeks before our road trip. Right around the time the messages started. She'd known he was suddenly available, professionally and presumably otherwise, and she'd started the conversation. That was the timeline. I sat with this for a while. I didn't do anything with it immediately. I just let it be true. The one thing I did decide to do, purposefully and without apology, was to tell the truth to the people in my life. Not to perform grievance, but because I had watched Melissa manage narrative for 3 years with expert precision and I was not interested in being managed posthumously. Ryan already knew. I told Claire. I told 2 friends from grad school, Alex and Connor, who'd been at our first anniversary dinner and who deserved to know why they wouldn't be seeing Melissa again. I told my mother, who said, well, now I understand why your father and I never liked that she never asked us questions, which was a very specific kind of maternal vindication. I did not tell anyone who knew Melissa directly. Not yet. I didn't see the purpose. She would tell whatever story she told, and people who knew her would believe her or not, and that was something I couldn't control and didn't especially want to. My dignity was not contingent on her accounting for herself. That was August. By October, something had changed in me that was difficult to name but easy to feel. The grief had restructured. It wasn't gone, it would surface at odd moments, the middle of a grocery store, the start of a song, a Tuesday evening when I used to know exactly what she'd be doing and now didn't, but it had moved out of the center of my chest and into a more manageable address. Dr. Nolan said this was normal, that trauma and loss did not dissolve linearly, and that the fact that I was functioning well and investing in myself was evidence of genuine movement, not avoidance. I got a promotion in October. Senior project engineer, a role that came with a significant salary jump and lead responsibility on a new transit infrastructure project the firm had just won. My manager said I'd been operating at that level for a year and the title was overdue. I took her to lunch to celebrate, which was the right impulse, and then I celebrated again that evening with Ryan and the cycling group at a bar where I let myself be happy without qualifying it. I called Claire the next day. "You were right," I said. She didn't say "I told you so." She just laughed and asked me to visit for Thanksgiving. I visited for Thanksgiving and it was the best holiday I'd had in years, not because Melissa's absence improved it, she'd always gotten along fine with Claire, but because I was fully present in a way that I hadn't been in longer than I'd realized. There's a version of yourself that you put in storage when you're accommodating someone else's anxiety, working around their stress, managing your own natural expanse to fit a shared space. I didn't know I'd been doing it until I stopped. At Claire's table with her husband and their 2 kids and her dog and too much food, I laughed at something my brother-in-law said and it came from somewhere genuine and unguarded, and I recognized the feeling as one I'd been missing without knowing its name. In December, at the cycling group's holiday gathering at someone's backyard fire pit, I met a woman named Dana. She was there because she was a neighbor of the woman who hosted the party, not a cyclist herself, and we ended up talking for 3 hours near the fire with cups of mulled wine while other people circulated around us. She was an occupational therapist, mid-30s, divorced a couple of years prior, funny in a specific dry way that I found immediately comfortable. We didn't exchange numbers that night because the timing felt too pointed, but she gave me her last name and I found her on social media the next day and sent a message that said something like, "Good to meet you last night." The fire was the best part. She wrote back, "I think the company was a close second." We had coffee the following Saturday. I want to be honest about Dana, because she matters in this story but not in the way you might expect. She was not a rebound. She was not a strategy. She was a person who came into my life at a moment when I was ready for someone genuine, and she was genuine in a way that was immediately clarifying by contrast. She asked me questions and waited for the answers. She talked about her own past with a kind of calm self-awareness that I found rare. She had opinions that were fully formed and openly held, and she changed them when new information warranted, and she told me when she disagreed with me and why. It was remarkable, in the way that only things you've been missing can be remarkable, to sit across from someone who was simply not working an angle. I told her about Melissa on our 3rd date. Not the whole thing, the outline, that I'd come out of a 3-year relationship about 8 months prior, that it had ended over a betrayal of trust, that I'd done a lot of work on myself since and felt genuinely ready for something new. She listened and then said, "I appreciate you telling me. I went through something similar in my marriage. Erosion, mostly, not a single event. But trust is the same thing either way, once you see the shape of how it was broken, you can't unsee it." "Exactly," I said. "How are you feeling now?" she asked. "Better than I expected," I said. "And I mean that as a real answer, not a performance." She smiled. "I can tell the difference." We were careful with each other in the way that people who've been hurt tend to be, not fearful, but deliberate. We took our time. It was good. By February it was genuinely good. Here is the part one did not anticipate, and which arrived without my engineering. In late January, a mutual connection reached out to me, a guy named Todd I knew from a conference 3 years back, loosely connected to both my professional circle and, it turned out, to a former colleague of Melissa's at her marketing firm. He'd heard, through the specific geometry of small professional worlds, that I'd broken up with Melissa and that the circumstances had been notable. He wasn't prying. Todd was a straightforward person and he'd been asking, he said, because he had a friend who was beginning to date her and he valued my assessment. I thought about this carefully. I was not interested in revenge as performance. I was not trying to burn anything down. But I was also not going to lie to protect someone who demonstrated she was willing to lie to protect herself. I told Todd what had happened, factually and without embellishment. The messages. The location history. The apartment on Broad Street. The 22 days during which I didn't exist in her communications with her ex. I told it the way I would tell a timeline in a project debrief, sequentially, accurately, without loading it with emotion because the facts carried sufficient weight on their own. Todd listened and then said, "Wow. Okay. That's genuinely awful. Thank you for being straight with me. Tell your friend," I said. He should know. Yeah, Todd said. I will. I don't know what Todd's friend decided. That was not mine to manage. What I knew was that I'd told the truth when asked, and the truth would do what truth does. What I did not expect was that Todd would also mention this conversation to a woman named Beth, who was a moderately active presence in Melissa's professional social circle, and that Beth would apparently do some asking around of her own, and that within a few weeks the story would have circulated in a way that I had neither engineered nor tried to stop. The professional world in Sacramento is not large. Marketing is even smaller. Melissa's reputation as a reliable, trusted professional, which she cared about enormously, it had always been a significant piece of how she understood herself, began to develop a small but persistent asterisk. I heard about this secondhand, through Ryan, who told me without relish that some of the people in her professional orbit were keeping a certain distance. I did not celebrate it. I noted it the way I'd noted the screenshot on that gas station stop, as information, as a data point in the truthful record of what had happened. The more significant consequence, which I learned about through Claire of all people, who had stayed loosely connected to a few people from our shared social circle, was that Derek Calloway had apparently reacted to some version of the story getting around by distancing himself from Melissa. What she'd told him about her situation, what version of our relationship she'd given him, I don't know. What I know is that the narrative she'd constructed, whatever it was, apparently couldn't survive contact with the factual account, and that when Todd's friend told Todd and Todd told Beth and Beth told others, something deflated for Derek Calloway as well. Claire heard from their mutual acquaintance that Melissa was not, by February, in the relationship she might have been planning to be in. I did not feel triumphant about this. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was something closer to clarity, the specific, quiet satisfaction of a world that had briefly been made illegible by someone else's lies returning to an order I could read again. I was in the middle of something good. I had Dana and the cycling group and the promotion and Dr. Nolan and my sister and my friends and a seismic retrofit project in South Sacramento that was going to extend the lifespan of an overpass by 40 years. My life had structure and meaning and people in it who were present in full, not just in the margins of something else. In March I got a text from Melissa. It was the first direct communication since the note she'd left on the kitchen table. It read, "Can we talk? There are things I should have said." I read it. I thought about Dr. Nolan's distinction between processing and feeding. I thought about the 3 hours at the fire pit in December that led to Dana. I thought about Thanksgiving at Claire's table and the laugh that came from somewhere genuine. I thought about McWay Falls and the loose grip. I typed, "I hope you're doing okay. I don't need anything from this conversation that I don't already have." She didn't respond. I put the phone in my pocket and went back to the plans I was reviewing. And that was that. It is now 7 months since Santa Barbara. I am sitting in my apartment on a Friday evening, the same apartment, though it looks different now. I've rearranged things the way I actually want them rather than the way we'd compromised on, with Dana coming over in an hour and a cycling race on Sunday that I've been training for and a project presentation on Monday that I'm genuinely proud of. And I am recording this because someone asked me to and because I think the record is worth having. Here is what I know that I didn't know before: trust is not passive. I had trusted Melissa the way I'd trusted a structure that had never been tested under real load, completely, based on how it looked from the outside, without checking the welds. The failure was hers. She made the choices. She built the deception and maintained it and looked me in the face while she did it. But I had never looked too closely, never asked the questions that might have introduced productive friction. I had confused the absence of visible problems with the presence of integrity, and those are not the same thing. I know better now what to look for. I know that trust is earned in the small daily specifics, the way someone handles information that costs them something, the way they answer questions they weren't expecting, the way they talk about people who aren't in the room. Dana does all of these things in ways I've noticed and held and measured. They have passed tests she doesn't know she was taking. That is what integrity looks like in practice. I also know that I made the right call in Santa Barbara. Not just factually right, tactically right, emotionally right, right in the way that honors yourself. I could have stayed. I could have had the long, difficult conversation in the hotel room and tried to rebuild something that had been built on a foundation I now couldn't trust. Some people do that. I understand why. For me, it wasn't possible. What I had seen in those messages, what I had understood about the systematic management of my perception, was too fundamental. You can forgive a moment of bad judgment. You cannot easily undo the discovery that someone had a secret system for handling you. Renting that car and driving north alone in the dark was the loneliest 4 hours of my life. It was also the most self-respecting thing I have done. I keep the screenshot of the location history in a folder on my phone. Not obsessively, not to feed anything, I barely look at it. But it's there the way a scar is there, as evidence that something real happened, that I was not imagining it, that the version of events I lived through was the true one. When you've had your reality managed for a while, proof matters. The screenshot is proof. It is the artifact of the moment when I stopped being someone else's variable and started being the protagonist of my own story. On the Sunday of the cycling race, 7 months after Santa Barbara and 8 months after what I now think of as the last innocent morning of the Pacific Coast Highway trip, I came in fourth in my age bracket. Dana was at the finish line with coffee, because she'd listened when I mentioned I always wanted coffee after a ride and she'd remembered and acted on it without being asked. Small. Specific. The Welds holding. I crossed the line breathing hard and she handed me the coffee and I was sweaty and ridiculous and I looked at her and thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Not the absence of fear, not the relief of being chosen, but the simple, grounded certainty of standing next to someone who shows up as advertised. Somewhere south of here, I'd heard from Claire's acquaintance grapevine, Melissa had moved to a smaller apartment following a job transition, was navigating a professional landscape that had quietly complicated itself, and was by all accounts not in the relationship she'd banked on. I didn't check. I didn't need to verify. The facts had done their work without any help from me. I drank my coffee in the morning light at the finish line, fourth place ribbon in my hand, Dana beside me talking about where to get breakfast, the race still buzzing in my legs and my chest, and I thought about the morning we left for the Pacific Coast Highway and how I'd called myself the luckiest man alive. I wasn't wrong. I was just lucky about the wrong thing. The real luck came later, at a fire pit in December, 4 hours